All right, welcome everybody to another edition of the College Hoop News Podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Tony Patelis. We have another great episode tonight, so much to get to. Before we start, just want to thank everybody for last week, all the viewers. Last week we had our most watched weekly recap to date, so we had a really successful episode. A lot of stuff was covered. We'll do the same thing tonight. I bring in another great guest. Eli Boettger is going to join me. Eli joined me for the Mountain West Conference preview in the preseason, so we're happy to have him back. Eli, how are you tonight?
Good, I'm doing well, Tony. I hope some of my stuff from the Mountain West preview is still holding true today, but it's been a pretty crazy league so far.
I know, definitely. Just to get you familiar with Eli, Eli can be found on Twitter at Boettger_Eli. He's the lead writer at MWWire.com, really interesting website that covers the Mountain West. Also, he's got a great blog, heatcheckcbb.com. So any questions regarding Mountain West or other college basketball stuff, definitely give him a shout out. Very, very knowledgeable guy. So we got a lot of stuff to cover tonight. We're going to talk Mountain West, Pac-12. We're going to talk a little bit about the Big 12 SEC Challenge yesterday. Also, Eli's very big into bracketology, so I'm going to pick his brain at the end of the episode today. So we're going to start with the Mountain West. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Nevada, a little bit about that game last week with Wyoming, Eli. So basically one of these crazy, late night Mountain West games, as we know. Laramie is a really tough place to play. Number one, it's at high elevation. Number two, Wyoming's a really, really tough team at home. I obviously don't think this hurts Nevada's at-large chances too much. One being a road game, tough environment. But how much, the one thing I really wanted to ask you about Nevada, Eli, how much room for error does this team have? Because, they obviously passed the eye test. But, that resume isn't great. So what do you think about this Nevada team and their at-large chances? And is there anything that could maybe slip them up?
Right. I think you nailed it on the head, because when you watch Nevada, you see a tournament team, and even more so because you see a team that could probably win a game or two in the tournament. But going forward, their resume is lacking, as you said. They have one quality win to date, which was in November against Rhode Island. I believe that was the first Monday of the season, and they don't have many quality wins since then. I think you're right. Losing in Laramie is not as bad as some people, at least outsiders, would think, because it's just such a difficult place to play at elevation. It was a late start. It was a 9 p.m. tip, and it lasted almost until midnight in Laramie in double overtime. So it's not a bad loss. And actually, when I come back and look on it, it actually would have been a quadrant one win for Nevada had they won, which surprised me a little bit. But the concern for me about Nevada is their short rotation. I know that we mention it countless times, and I mention it all the time on Twitter. The reason that Nevada is so good is because Eric Musselman has been able to develop and create a roster that's based solely on transfers, or almost entirely on transfers. And one of the detriments to that is that you have to sit out a number of guys. So there are only 8 scholarship players that are active for Nevada right now. And so in the situation where you have one guy banged up, which Cody Martin is right now, if you have a couple guys in foul trouble, which they were against Wyoming with Lindsey Drew and Kendall Stevens both fouled out, then, you're playing with just 1 or 2 guys on the bench. So it is a small margin for error, because Nevada has to be fantastic with just the 5 or 6 guys that they play on any given night. And they have to win a lot of games between now and Selection Sunday. So they are in good standing tournament-wise as we speak right now. But if they do slip up, maybe at home to a weaker team, or if they bow out in the first round of the Mountain West tournament, it's going to be really interesting on Selection Sunday to see what happens.
Yeah, the rest of their schedule, it's not easy. They still have to go to Boise State. They have to play at UNLV, at San Diego State. 2 of those teams aren't great, but still very tough home court advantages. If they lose 3 or 4 games in the Mountain West this year, and maybe they slip up, say, in the semifinal in the tournament, do you think they still get in?
It would have to be. I'd have to see who it is that they lose to, but that's going to make things really interesting, because their chances to notch any more quadrant one wins are pretty limited. They have a shot against San Diego State on the road, and also at Boise State. So those will be 2 opportunities for them. But if they split those games or go 0-2 in those games, that's going to make things really interesting. But it's just hard to envision a team that is as good as Nevada to miss the tournament. But we have seen in the past some really good mid-major teams that were not nearly as fortunate on Selection Sunday.
Absolutely. The other few other teams I wanted to ask you about. Obviously, Boise State is that other team in the conference right now that possibly could get into the NCAA tournament. As much as they have passed my eye test, their resume isn't really as good as Nevada's. They really haven't beaten an NCAA tournament team all year. Their best out of conference win was probably Oregon. And so I don't know about if they have great at-large chances. What do you think about Boise State's shot?
It's just declined over time because at the time when Boise State squeaked out that pretty dramatic win over Oregon in December, we thought that was going to be the win that would probably put them into the tournament conversation. And it did at the time, but as the months progress, power conference teams, they just beat up on each other, and in the process, they're able to notch quality victories, and Boise State just doesn't get as many opportunities. So they nearly picked up a win in Reno against Nevada a couple weeks ago, but they did come up short in that one. So they're 0-3 against Group 1 teams, which is very concerning. It's hard for me to envision a scenario where Boise State gets in with an at-large bid just because of their limited quality victories right now. So I think it might be auto bid or bust. But if they do tear off a number of victories from now, if they win out in conference play and able to get to the Mountain West tournament final and lose to, say, Nevada, I think they're probably right in the conversation, but things are not looking too great for the Broncos right now.
Yeah, I think that home game with Nevada is almost a must-win.
I think so, yeah.
Definitely, to get at least to keep them in the conversation. Just unfortunate because I really like this team. Chandler Hutchinson's a tremendous player. I think Leon Rice has done a really good job. I didn't think they'd be this good. I know that their resume isn't great, but they're still 18-4, 8-2 in conference. Okay, so let's go to the negative here. San Diego State, just very, very disappointing this year. I think a lot of people thought they could be a top 3 team in conference. They do not look like that right now. They're solid offensively. I mean, they average 78 points a game, but, they can't really shoot the 3. This is just, to me, is not the same defensive team as it has been in the past. We've talked about it a lot. Steve Fisher always has an elite, defensive program, and they're just not that type of team anymore. Just very disappointing. Last 5 games, they're 1-4. They've given up 83 points, 77 points, 79 points, 78 points, 88 points. What is wrong with this team? They're very talented, so it's a little bit disappointing. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. And this is a team that most people had around second or third in the Mountain West heading into the year, which might have been too high based on what they did last season. I believe they finished 6th in the conference standings a year ago, but they returned basically everyone. They also had some nice additions. And I guess to get to the bright spots first, Matt Mitchell and Jalen McDaniels, who are both freshmen this year, they've been phenomenal. And they've been 2 of the more consistent players on the Aztecs the whole season. Matt Mitchell's an excellent shooter, and he'll improve as he goes along, and Jalen McDaniels has been solid down low. But just so much inconsistent play, especially out of the guards. You see Jeremy Hensley and Trey Kell, and Kell did get banged up against UNLV, he sprained his ankle, so we'll keep an eye on that. But it seems like those 2 are just never on the same page offensively at the same time. I looked at something a few weeks ago to see how often Kell and Hensley combined to shoot over 40% from the field. And I don't have the number in front of me, but I can't say it was more than a third of the games that they've played in the Aztec uniform that they've shot over 40% from the field. So as good as they've appeared offensively at times, the defense is just not the same Aztec defense that we've seen in the past. This is probably the worst defensively that they've been in over a decade. They're usually in the top 10, top 15 in defensive efficiency. They're 85th right now. So when you have an offense that's inconsistent and takes bad shots on occasion, usually they're able to fall back on their defensive intensity, and that just hasn't been the case this season.
Yeah, Trey Kell and Helmsley, they're good players, but they're just not efficient. I mean, Kell shoots 37% from the field. He only shoots 34% from 3. And Helmsley shoots 27% from 3. They're not a good perimeter shooting team. Just a little disappointing. I still think the Steve Fisher thing has been a little bit overlooked. I think people thought, oh, well, Brian Dutcher has been with Steve Fisher forever, so it should be a smooth transition. But, losing a Hall of Fame coach like Steve Fisher is not easy.
Yeah, I completely agree. And even in the tail end of Steve Fisher's time in San Diego, the teams weren't nearly as good. So right. they missed the tournament the last couple of years. So even at the time when Dutcher came in, San Diego State was declining. So I mean, you hope to see this group get it together because, like you said, they're just so talented. You have players that excelled in high school and appear to have bright colleges, and they've or college careers, and they've done pretty well. But I just don't know if this team's going to put it together. They're sitting 8th right now in the Mountain West, which would be the first time they've done it, I think, since 2000, back when the league had just 8 teams. So it's hard. It's always hard for me to count this team out, and then I just had the same conversation last year. It's just It's hard to imagine that San Diego State could finish in the bottom half of the Mountain West when their roster is just oozing with talent.
One more question before you move on to the next team. Devin Watson, has he met expectations in your opinion? Because I heard nothing but good things about him. All the Aztec fans were raving about him this preseason. He's going to be a big-time scorer. What do you think? How's his play been, and do you think he's met expectations?
I think he's met expectations. I don't think he's exceeded expectations. Mm-hmm. He's been a good offensive outlet for San Diego State, and he's gotten buckets when they've needed them. But I think, and I mentioned this heading into the season, that Devin Watson's role was going to it definitely wasn't going to increase in the San Diego State uniform. He was definitely the leader in San Francisco, at least by usage terms. So they have other options on offense that they can go to. So Trey Kell and Jeremy Hemsley, and now Matt Mitchell has been a good option on offense. So I think we're expecting to see his role decline a little bit this season, but when he has taken shots, they've usually been pretty good, and he's been pretty efficient as well. So I'd say he's met expectations so far.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I got to add one more question. What do you feel about Brian Dutcher? Do you think he's the guy to, keep this train rolling, this consistent success that they've had for this, last decade or so?
I'm still in wait and see mode. I think it's too early to give a complete review or even a prognosis of what we can expect in the future years. But I do like the fact that he's willing to change philosophies from what Steve Fisher did during his time. And that can be good and that can be bad because Steve Fisher, I mean, he excelled for nearly 2 decades with the Aztecs, playing mostly defensive and slow-paced basketball. And Dutcher's willing to speed it up and maybe implement some more schemes on offense. So that's definitely something interesting and something new that we're seeing in Viejas Arena. But for the most part, I think I'm just in wait and see mode. I think once Dutcher gets a few more guys on campus and maybe this roster just doesn't have it in them, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, somebody on Twitter last night, I think I told you, asked me if he was on the hot seat. I said, it's a little too early for that, but let's hold our horses.
Give it a year or so.
Exactly. All right, UNLV's up next. Seems to me UNLV, I think it's pretty obvious. They kind of just played over their heads early this season. They're not very good defensively. They turn the ball over like crazy. They don't really get much production outside of their top 4 guys. What do you think about this UNLV team? I think they kind of are what we thought. I mean, I think me and you thought maybe they're in that 4 to 6 range to start the season. They played really well out of the gate, but they've kind of fell back, kind of come back down to earth a little bit. Talk about the Rebels, Eli.
I think I should have looked at their schedule a little bit closer heading into the season because what I was expecting out of UNLV is that they'd struggle in the early going, because they had so many newcomers and just a change of scenery for a number of these guys. But they came out of the gates and they started off 11-2 in non-conference play, and the 2 losses were both in overtime against Northern Iowa and Arizona. So not bad teams by any means. But since then, since league play has started, they've just appeared to be a different team. They've struggled defensively. They haven't hit shots in timely situations. Brandon McCoy has been off and on. He played excellent against San Diego State, but I think the last stretch has probably hurt his draft stock a little bit because he's had some issues with some of these Mountain West big men. But I think ultimately we're probably going to be on the more correct side than the incorrect side on UNLV. It takes time to gel when you have so many newcomers, and this team is oozing with talent just like San Diego State is. But just to put it together on a nightly basis, you see that they haven't won consecutive games since December.
Wow.
It's a bit of a concern, and even at home they've had their issues. So I think we were leaning on the idea that UNLV would progress as the season went along, and then would be a tough out in Mountain West tournament because they play in front of their home crowd, but they haven't been great at home, and they seem to have declined the last few weeks. And the schedule obviously has been much more challenging the last few weeks than it was the first 2 months of the season. But I think we need to be a little bit more critical of what UNLV has been the last month or so.
Yeah. Where do you think McCoy goes in the draft? Like, where would you put him right now? Like you said, his draft stock might have declined a little bit. What are your thoughts on him as a pro?
I think he has excellent pro potential. I think he's probably closer to 20 than he is the lottery, just from what other people are saying. I see that he's had some issues offensively. Maybe his rebounding could improve a little bit. But he's an excellent pro prospect. I don't think it takes long at all to realize that this guy's the real deal and he can excel at the next level. He's much better than what Anthony Bennett was in college, what Steven Zimmerman was in college, which we hope, because both of those guys did not materialize in the pros. But yeah, I think it's definitely a first round potential if he does choose to go, which I think we probably lean that way right now. So probably in that 20 to 25 range.
You know, I think we can both agree that the UNLV crowd kind of had a little bit too much expectations for this team, especially the way they finished last year. But I still think even with the struggles of late, they should still feel pretty good where they are. I mean, they were one of the worst teams in the league last year, and they're sitting at 15-6, 4-4. I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, I think so too. And the losses that they have suffered, they were competitive and close in all of their losses. So they lost to Boise State by 9, Utah State by 7, New Mexico by 4, and Fresno State by 6. And those are games that they were competitive throughout. So they're 4-4 right now. They could easily be 6-2. So I think that going forward they should be okay. And if everything comes together, they'll still be a tough out in the Mountain West tournament. I don't think you can count out this very, very talented UNLV team on their home floor.
Yeah. Okay. Last team I wanted to talk about, we have to talk about New Mexico. I think this is why New Mexico brought in Paul Weir, because this roster, I think we both can agree it's not very good, but he's got them playing really well right now. They've won 5 of 6. I'm not sure they can keep it up. But I think it's a good building block for next year because next year's group looks pretty darn good. I know that there's some question marks with chemistry and everything because he's taking we can't deny it. He's taking a chance with some of these guys like Lyle and Jackson. And I know Carlton Bragg has had some issues. Talk about the job that Paul Weir's done and maybe talk about a little bit about next year's group as well.
Yeah, I think touching on next year's group, they were able to add Carlton Bragg last week, which should be a good addition for New Mexico. I think that, like you mentioned, he's already switched places twice, so that's a bit of a concern. And Paul Weir is willing to take a gamble, and you have to commend him on that. So he's able to add 3 high major transfers for next year's team. They also get a 4-star guard. So the talent will be in Albuquerque very soon. And what Paul Weir has been able to accomplish in these last couple of weeks in his first ever Mountain West competition has been pretty admirable. Being able to knock off UNLV at the Thomas and Mack, being able to beat Wyoming. He was also able to etch out a win against San Diego State, which is impressive. And a game that, in my opinion, San Diego State has no business losing because you pair up these rosters next to each other. You have 4 stars and 5 stars listed all next to the Aztecs players. And the New Mexico roster, for the most part, is unrecognizable. So, the sky's the limit for once Paul Weir has talent in Albuquerque, not to knock the current guys, but what he's been able to do the last few weeks with this roster is pretty impressive, considering that this team started off 2-8 against D1 competition and looked fairly uncompetitive in most of those games.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I think it has a lot to do with his coaching and what type of guy he is, because, again, this roster is not very good, and for them to be winning games consistently, I think is really impressive. So let's move on here. A lot of good stuff on the Mountain West. I wanted to talk a little bit about the SEC Big 12 Challenge. I think, the SEC gained some respect, obviously, winning this thing 6-4. Tennessee got a win, Florida, Alabama. Vanderbilt got a very surprising win. Arkansas and Kentucky had a big win last night. What stood out to you from this tournament, and how impressed you were with the SEC?
Yeah, I am impressed with the SEC. I think that this league's a lot deeper than most people were expecting coming into the season. So you have, probably anywhere between 8 and 9 teams that still have a chance of getting to the tournament, which is very impressive for a league that has struggled to punch tournament bids the last few years. So they're able to serve it to what most consider is the strongest league, or at least the deepest league to this point. I think Alabama's win over Oklahoma is a pretty big one, being Trae Young and the Sooners. That one was impressive. Vanderbilt's win over TCU, I think, was very unexpected. TCU has been pretty hit or miss the last couple of weeks, so that's a good win for the Commodores. And Kentucky coming back against West Virginia, that was really impressive. I don't remember the point total which Kentucky trailed by, but they're
17.
Was it 17? Okay,
yep.
Yeah. They're able to dig in and grind out a win against West Virginia on the road. So it does wonders for their resume, and also gives a big boost for those freshmen there, for John Calipari. So impressive performance by the SEC, no doubt.
Yeah, the Kentucky performance, obviously very impressive. They kind of grew up before our eyes last night. Going into a tough environment like West Virginia. West Virginia is a very experienced team, a lot of veterans. Down 17, 3 minutes into the second half to come back. The really impressive thing was Kentucky's a very turnover-laden team. They average about 14 a game. We know West Virginia's pressure is just crazy. They had 11 turnovers in the first half. They only had 2 in the second half. So they really turned things around. Very impressive. A couple things I wanted to ask you about. First of all, Texas A&M goes into Allen, obviously a very difficult place to play. I wanted to get your take on this Texas A&M team. Kind of looks like to me like a team that's kind of given up, a little soft. I know Kansas is really good, tough place to win, but how do you feel about this Texas A&M team? Because they're really disappointing. I mean, I was very high on this club.
It feels like ages ago that Texas A&M ran West Virginia out of the building to open the season.
Right.
It's pretty remarkable where the two teams have gone since then. But you're right. I believe they're 2-7 in their last 9 games, and the tail has just fallen off for A&M right now. I think that they've dealt with a lot of injuries and suspensions. That's been a problem for them, but they've just been inconsistent. They're 104th nationally in adjusted offensive efficiency. They just got gutted by Kansas last night on the offensive side. So it's hard for me to imagine that Texas A&M can't get this thing figured out, because they have so much talent on the roster, and they do have so many quality win chances the rest of the year. So I think they do find a way to sneak into the tournament, but as of right now, they're 4 games under 500 in league play. So it's always questionable for teams to get into the dance with a losing record in league play, but I think that they'll probably find a way to figure this thing out. There are too many studs on this roster to not win 20 games or so.
I kept giving him the benefit of the doubt, because you have to admit they're dealing with a lot of injuries, suspensions. Remember, DJ Hogue missed time. Dwayne Wilson's been out. Even Robert Williams missed time, and Admon Gilder tore his knee. So I kept saying, okay, this team's going to get healthy and going to be fine. They've been healthy for a while now, and they still haven't figured things out. So they're kind of in that danger zone. They're still in the NCAA tournament, from a lot of brackets I've seen. But, a couple more losses, and you're talking about, they're going to be, pacing on Selection Sunday possibly.
Right. They've gone from what most people thought was a sneaky pick to get into the Final Four in November to a team that is probably closer to the first 4 than the Final Four the remainder of the season. So we'll see what happens with these guys, but lack of consistency down the stretch and just what they've accomplished the last month plus has just been very concerning.
Yeah. Other team I want to talk to you about is TCU. TCU suffers. That's just a bad loss. You're talking about a Vanderbilt team that's just not very good. They just lost Matthew Fisher-Davis to a shoulder injury. He's out for the year. And they lose at Vanderbilt. I did not see that coming at all. That's just a really bad resume, killer. Vandy's just not a very good team, as I said. How much of a loss like that can hurt a team's resume?
Yeah, it's a very, very bad loss, and not one that they expected. I guess the one benefit is that it was on the road, so that doesn't affect them nearly as much. But TCU really has no business losing this game to Vanderbilt, a team that is significantly under 500 right now, and they've put up the white flag for the most part. So TCU, which should be at least a top 6, top 7 seed in the tournament, losing to this pretty bad Vanderbilt team, that's a concern. But when you lose, consider, your top player, your top point guard in Jalen Fisher, you lose him for the rest of the season. It's a big notch there for TCU. So I think that they need to figure out how to win without Jalen Fisher, and I think that's a big loss for them. And I think that takes them from a team that could win some games of the tournament to one that could easily get bounced in the first round.
Yeah, and they're obviously, we know they're in the Big 12, which every single game is just an absolute, knockout, drag-out fight. And they're 3-5 in conference, okay? And looking at their next 3 games, they're at Oklahoma State, who's playing some pretty good basketball right now. Then they have to play Texas Tech at home, and then they're at Kansas. They could easily lose all 3 of those games.
Yeah, and then they host Texas, and then they're at West Virginia again. So
right, it's just brutal.
It could be a 2-3 stretch, could be a 1-4 stretch, and that would put them up to 4 games under 500 in league play, and that makes things far more interesting for the Horned Frogs than I think they would have imagined it would have been about a month ago. So they do have some decent wins on their schedule. They did beat Nevada on a neutral court. They have that win over West Virginia. But besides that, there isn't a ton on their resume, and that loss to Vanderbilt last night really hurts things.
Yeah, for sure. The last team I want to talk to you about before we move on is Tennessee. I just want to pat myself on the back real quick. I told everybody Tennessee was going to be really good, and they're really good. So at least I got something right this preseason. But I love this team, Eli. They have guards everywhere. They're one of the best defensive teams in the country. They have a matchup nightmare in Grant Williams. Do you think this is a type of a team that can do some damage in the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that they're pretty well balanced. They're not exceptional on either side of the floor. They're not terrible on either side of the floor. They've definitely been battle tested. They have a number of quality wins. That win over Purdue, which we thought was just an anomaly early in the season, is now turning out to be one of the best wins you'll find on any team resume. So that's fantastic for the Volunteers. And I mentioned this in the preseason. I wasn't super high on Tennessee necessarily, but I did mention that the Volunteers have just so many opportunities to pick up quality wins, and that in itself could get them into the tournament. And as of right now, sitting at 15-5 with some great wins, I think they're definitely capable of winning a game or 2 in the tournament.
For sure. They started out SEC play 0-2. Since then, they've won 6 of 7. They've been playing really good basketball. I think they're the 3rd best team in the conference right now. I mean, I don't think you can argue, at least top 4.
And it's crazy to think that Tennessee and Auburn are at the top right now, just with how all the preseason projections came in. But sure enough, that's where they are, and I think Tennessee is going to be a tough round in the tournament.
For sure. All right, so I want to talk about Virginia real quick. They're a really cool kind of team to talk about because some people love them, some people can't stand them. How do you feel about Virginia? They had postseason struggles in the past, just kind of with the way they play. I know, they're not an up-and-down team. They don't score the ball well, but they're the best defensive team in the country. I sent out a tweet today. I don't know if you saw it. They haven't scored 70 points since January 3rd, and they're undefeated in those games. It's just amazing to me. They scored 65, 61, 59, 64, 68, 68, 61. They haven't scored 70 points in a month. So
that's just bizarre.
It's just so bizarre. Can they do that, though? Can they win 6 games in a row in the NCAA tournament against top-tier teams? Are they a national title contender, in your opinion?
I think we need to take them seriously as a national title contender, and I think that most people have at this point. Going on the road and beating Duke, which is definitely one of the elite offenses in the country, holding the Blue Devils to 63 points on their own floor in Cameron Indoor, that's enough to put Virginia on the map in terms of title conversation. I think going back to your earlier question, which is about whether we can trust Virginia in the tournament, I think I'm probably still in the wait and see mode for that because Virginia plays at just such a slow pace that they're able to win these games when they only score 65 points or 60 points. I guess the one benefit to Virginia is that we have seen teams in the past advance to the Final Four with pretty average or below average offenses. I mean, you take a look at what South Carolina did last year as a 7 seed. Their offense, I don't believe, was even in the top 100 in adjusted efficiency, and they're able to mow their region down just by playing good defense. I think that the one thing I'd like it's not possible. I think I would like Virginia to have is a go-to scorer, a go-to guard, someone maybe like Carson Edwards or Jalen Brunson, a guy that can you can give him the ball and you can count on him to attack the lane and score. And I just don't know if Virginia has that kind of player. I know that Kyle Guy can get some timely buckets, Ty Jerome as well, but I just don't know if they have that guy that can get a go-ahead basket when it might be 58-58, it might be 60-60, but at the end of the day, you need to outscore your opponents. And even if they're able to hold a team under 60 points, they need to reach that echelon themselves. And I just don't know if they have a go-to guy that you can get a basket late in the game.
Yeah, that's a great point, Eli. They have Kyle Guy, he averages 15 a game, but like you said, can he go get you a basket when you need it in the last 2 minutes of a contest? Other than that, they have one guy in double figures, and that's Devon Hall. He's averaging 12.7 points per game. It's a little dicey after that. So that's why I always have a cause for concern for Virginia because of the way they play on the offensive end of the floor. And, if you can hold teams to 50 points, that's going to be really hard when you're playing a team like Purdue in the NCAA tournament with all those weapons. And, it's going to be hard to slow a team like that down.
I think I definitely agree. I think if Virginia enters the tournament as number 1 seed, I think when we pull up all these bracket projections on Tuesday and Wednesday, I think they'd probably be the least selected Final Four team amongst the 1 seeds because they don't play an entertaining type of basketball that a lot of people like to see. They're not going to explode for 80 points on any given night. But going back to my earlier point, I think if you put a guy like Chris Chiozza or Carson Edwards on this team, I think it would be hands down the best team in basketball, and one that's perfectly suited for the tournament. But as of right now, I feel like there's going to be at some point, maybe in the Sweet 16 or Elite 8, that they're in a dogfight with a team, I don't know, like West Virginia or something like that, and they're just unable to get a bucket late in the game. So and that's one game that you're off, and that's it. So it'll be interesting to see what Virginia does from here on out.
And they're kind of known for slipping up in the tournament early the last few years. I know they made an Elite 8 run a few years ago, but other than that, they lost early last year. I know that they lost early in a few previous years. So
I think the game that they lost last year, I don't think they even scored 40 points against Florida.
Yeah, Florida smoked them. I think
they scored 30. They scored 39 points against Florida last year. That's not going to cut it.
That's just no, it's not. It's not, definitely. All right, so I want to go back to the West Coast a little bit. I wanted to talk to you about some Pac-12 teams, get your perspective on it. Arizona. So, Arizona, with all their issues, all their supposedly chemistry problems, locker room issues, they've won 15 of 16 games. So they're winning. They're getting it done. They're not getting it. It's not pretty. But can you just imagine if this team was clicking and getting along and listening to their coach, how good they'd be? Because, they win, but it's not pretty. What do you think about this Arizona team, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that the comments by Sean Miller were definitely a head scratcher, at least for me, saying that he's unable to reach his team or something like that. For whatever that's worth, I don't really know. But apparently there are some chemistry issues behind closed doors that we don't necessarily know about Arizona. They do have some personalities on that roster, so I guess it does make sense. But like you said, the fact that they're playing as well as they are right now, they did have that loss against Colorado, but losing on the road, it happens in conference play. So that's pretty permissible, I guess. But Arizona, once they get Raleigh Alkins back and healthy and fully healthy, I think that this is going to be a team to beat in the tournament just because they're so deep. They have so many studs. Dusan Ristich is playing fantastic about as well as he's played in the Arizona uniform right now. Alonzo Trier is quietly, I guess quietly is the right word for it, but he's been phenomenal for the Wildcats this season. Yeah. So the early losses, I think we can kind of push those aside. A lot of people freaked out when they were 3-3 to start the year and finished 8th in Atlantis, which was just bizarre. But it takes time for these teams to figure things out. And I think Arizona's hitting their stride right now in a pretty weak Pac-12 conference.
Yeah, a guy like DeAndre Ayton and Trier, I think just those two guys alone are good enough to carry a team, because those guys are so talented. I'll say this, though. I don't think they're good enough defensively right now to win the national championship. I don't. Sean Miller even said it after the game on Saturday that they're just not good enough. They can't put teams away. And I think they showed that against Utah. They showed that against Colorado. They couldn't put the teams away. Even Utah, who I think is pretty much an average team, maybe an NIT club at home, they should put that team away easily, in my opinion.
Yeah, that is concerning. I think defense still wins championships more than offenses in the NCAA tournament. So you'd like to see Arizona improve defensively, but I still think when you have a guy like DeAndre Ayton down low, right, I think that's a fantastic anchor for your roster. So if you do have quality front court players, or if you have guards that can drive, at least you have Ayton in the back defending the basket. So not a lot of teams can say that they have a guy like Ayton protecting the basket and can also score on the other end. So that does make me a bit more comfortable about Arizona than other teams that have struggled defensively.
Oh, definitely. He's borderline unstoppable. So let's stay in Arizona. I want to talk about Arizona State a little bit. Arizona State kind of reminds me of like Arkansas, kind of reminds me of UNLV, where they kind of just simply played way over their heads early this season. And don't get me wrong, I still think this is a pretty good team. But, I don't love them on defense. They shoot a ton of threes. They're kind of small. They don't have a lot of size up front. Still dangerous. Trey Holder's tremendous. Shannon Evans, Remy Martin, really great backcourt. Do you think this team is more how they're playing right now, or are they just struggling and they're really, really good?
I think I'm probably somewhere in between. I think that you take a team that can score as well as Arizona State does, and they've proved it early on in the season when they picked up all victories away from home. They beat Kansas State, Xavier, and Kansas. So you can't discount those wins. But the way that they've played since conference play started is definitely concerning. I think maybe the biggest red flag for Arizona State is even on nights when Trey Holder and Shannon Evans are shooting the rock pretty well, they still can't get stops and they can't put teams away. So I'm starting to feel a little bit like this team draws comparisons to last year's UCLA team. Yeah. And it definitely doesn't have nearly as many stars, but it's a team that is fantastic offensively, can get buckets like crazy, can go on a 9-0 run before you even catch your breath. But at the same time, they allow 80 points to their opponents like it's nothing. And it just seems like a team that could get upset in the first round if they're unable to stop some quality guards or good post play.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they're kind of in the middle too. I still think they're an NCAA tournament team. Don't get me wrong, but where would you put them NCAA tournament wise right now? Like, do you think? I think they're going to end up being like a 6 seed or a 7 seed, maybe. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's probably the range that they'll be. I think they probably finish up as about a 5 or 6 seed, and I think that it's a bit concerning because Arizona State will end up with a pretty decent seed. But if they do win their first game, they'll face off against a team that will be higher seeded than them. And the reason that they'll be seated where they're at is mostly due to what they accomplished in November and December. And they're not the same team that they were in November and December. So I know the committee takes into account what the teams have done in the last month or 2 months of the season, but the reason Arizona State will be seated where they're at is because they have that quality win against Kansas in non-conference play. They have that quality win against Kansas State. They have the quality win against Xavier. And that feels like it was such a long time ago. They've only beat Utah as their only quality win in between non-conference play. So I think they're probably in that probably 6 seed range, maybe 5, 6, 7. But if they get a bad matchup, if they get a team that is strong defensively, or I guess even strong offensively that can match the Sun Devils point for point, I think that's definitely going to be a trendy first-round upset.
Absolutely. All right, final team, Trojan Fury, USC. Now, Eli, this team has won 11 of 13, and I don't think people are paying attention. They're 11-2, and like I said, in their last 13 games, they're playing much better basketball. I think people forget how absolutely loaded this roster really is. I think, they struggled early. Don't get me wrong. A lot of stuff off the court with the FBI situation. They're without D'Anthony Melton. They have top 10 talent. They really do. And I think they could be a very dangerous, high seed in the NCAA tournament. What do you think about this team?
I think you nailed it there. I think that their losses are probably predicated to a bit of distractions that were going on. Obviously, the loss of D'Anthony Melton definitely hurts them. But this is a team that I thought was probably top 5, maybe even top 4 team preseason, just because they returned everyone from a team that won 2 tournament games a year ago. Also added some nice quality freshman depth. So I think that USC is just a team you can't count out at this point. I think that their recent winning streak is probably a combination of USC finally putting things together and also playing a relatively weak schedule. So they haven't notched many quality wins in the last few weeks or so. And that might be a bit of a concern. They did lose on the road to Stanford. They did lose at home to Washington. So that's something to keep an eye out on. But when they enter the tournament, whatever the seed might be, they'll probably be a double-digit seed the way things are shaking out right now. There's not going to be anyone that wants to play USC just because they have tournament experience. They have a head coach who is known to win games as a double-digit seed in the tournament. They have a ton of upperclassmen who know how to win games. And if they do get in the tournament, they'll probably be playing good basketball heading into the big dance. So I think USC, and they could win 1 or 2 games. I would not be shocked at all. But at the same time, they could go into a bit of a tailspin here and miss the tournament. So it's I think I'd probably put more faith in USC than I would Arizona State to win games in the tournament at this point.
Say they continue to win games and they get into the NCAA as, say, a 10 seed. Imagine them popping up and the 2 seeds seeing them next to them and saying, "Oh God, we got to play this team in the second round with 3 or 4 NBA guys on it." It's going to be a really interesting second round matchup if they can, advance and play a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament.
Okay, especially if it's a team like Auburn or someone that's never been there before, and you face off this upperclassman experienced team like USC. That just seems like cause for error right there.
I would want no business playing them in a second round matchup. So let me ask you, we're going to get into some bracketology next, but kind of going into that, how many bids do you think this league ends up getting? I think it could get as little as 3.
It's definitely a possibility. I think that Arizona is in fantastic shape. They'll get in. Probably as a top 4 seed, I'd imagine. Arizona State's in good shape because of those quality wins that we mentioned earlier. But from then on, you're talking about the bubble because you have USC, who's probably on the better side right now, UCLA, which is I have them out as of right now, Washington, Utah, Oregon, those are all teams that will probably be somewhere around the bubble. But for as much talent and for how good this conference should be, they really don't have any business sending 3 teams to the tournament. So if I had to take a guess right now, I think that I would guess that Pac-12 somehow finds a way to put 4 teams in the big dance. I would probably imagine it's Arizona, Arizona State, USC, and probably UCLA. But there's a lot that needs to be sorted out. But UCLA, Washington, and Utah need to pick up some quality wins between now and the NCAA tournament if they want any business.
The team I kind of feel for is Stanford because I think Stanford has really come on of late. I know they've lost 2 in a row, but they've dealt with so many injuries, and I think when everybody's on the floor for them, they're pretty good. But I just think it's a little too late, being 11-11. I think they're going to have to make a deep, win out here and, go on a run in the Pac-12 tournament. I kind of feel for that team because I think they're pretty good.
Yeah, they're definitely one of the top half teams in this conference, but the early losses to Eastern Washington on their home floor and also against Portland State, Long Beach State, that puts them in a position where they probably need to win the Pac-12 tournament to have a shot.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we're going to finish up here with some bracketology. I'm going to give Eli the floor here. I'm going to grill him on some teams and some seeding and everything. So I'm just interested. I think this is, let me just say, this is the perfect time for bracketology. We're heading into February. We finally have some resumes. You have some meat on the bones, as I like to say. Who are your top 4 seeds right now, Eli, if the tournament started today?
So for my top 4 seeds as of right now, and this bracket did come up on Friday, so take everything with a grain of salt. But I did have Villanova as my number 1 overall. I think that's pretty definitive right now. Their resume is excellent, and that's followed by Virginia, Purdue, and Duke. Yeah,
it's funny. I think the three you mentioned at first, Purdue, Villanova, and UAB. Those are kind of no brainers. But who's another team other than Duke? Do you think that could slip in there? I think Kansas might be there. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, I think Kansas has a good shot. The loss to Washington, which is going down as a home loss right now, I think that one hurts them a little bit. I think not enough people are talking about Xavier, what they have going on right now. They're 3rd in RPI. They have good predictive metrics right now. A win over Cincinnati at Seton Hall, home against Creighton. They've stacked up with 9 wins against the top 2 groups in RPI. So I think not enough people are talking about Musketeers right now as a potential number 1 seed. And I think Bracket Matrix just now put them in as a 2 seed, which I've had, I think, for a week or so.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna list off a few teams here. I want to get your take on them. First one is Maryland. Maryland's really fallen off of late. They missed a big opportunity today for a marquee win. Looking at their resume, they've kind of just beat Butler and not really anybody else of note, in my opinion. Are they in or out right now? And how do you feel about the Terps?
They're out right now, and I'm not confident that Maryland's going to find a way to get in this tournament. They've had so many opportunities to win quality games. They're 1-8 against the top 2 groups, which just doesn't get it done. And the one win that they did have was, it looks like, the first week of the season against Butler. So they're 1-5 in road games. They're sitting at 59 in RPI. Their predictive metrics are decent, but I think that Maryland's going to have a tough time finding quality wins between now and the NCAA tournament. So I think they're probably going to be out.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just don't think I think the Justin Jackson injury really hurt them, and they've just kind of fallen off of late. And as we know, in the Big Ten, there's not many opportunities for quality wins this year. It's just not a strong conference.
That's right. Contrary to popular belief, huh?
Yeah, Tim Brando said Indiana was a 3 seed today, I think.
For the NIT, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. All right, next up, Virginia Tech. Now, to me, they kind of passed the eye test. I know that their resume isn't great. They did pick up a really nice win at home against North Carolina last week. Where do you have Virginia Tech right now? What do you think about the Hokies?
I do have them out right now. I think that I do have them as my 4th team out, so they are in the mix right now. Their RPI is at 72, so that's definitely a bit of a concern that needs to rise a little bit between now and the tournament. But I do like Virginia Tech's chances more than Maryland because they have so many opportunities to win quality games. Even in the even in the ACC tournament in the first round or second round, they'll have opportunities to pick up quality wins. I think the win against North Carolina is big, but besides that, they don't really have a ton of meat on that resume. So they need to stack up at least maybe 2 or 3 wins against the top 2 groups to have a shot.
Yeah, well, the good news, they're in the ACC, so they're going to have plenty of opportunities, obviously. Mm-hmm. Next team is team I really, really like. I know that they've been dealing with some injuries right now, but that's SMU. SMU's got a pretty decent resume. They've beaten Arizona. They beat USC. They have a nice win over Boise State. Also, Wichita State as well. How do you feel about SMU? They're in the tournament right now or no?
I do have them. They're in the first 4 for me right now. So they're right on the verge of missing the tournament, but they do have a couple nice wins. The Arizona one is one that's going to last and be pretty consistent for them. The road win against Wichita State is also a really good one. I know the committee favors road wins pretty heavily, so being able to beat your conference's best team or your conference's second best team, depending on what you think about Cincinnati, that's pretty big for SMU. So I think that they'll be somewhere around the bubble. I would probably imagine to end up on the first 4 or somewhere around it, but I do like their chances based on those 2 quality wins.
Yeah, the Jerry Foster injury is pretty bad for this team, though, because this is another team like Nevada with not a lot of depth. Mm-hmm. And when you lose a double-digit scorer like Foster, that's pretty tough to overcome. But hopefully they can sneak in because I think Shake Milton's really good, and I think they can maybe cause a little bit of some havoc for certain teams. The other team I want to talk about is Kansas State. What a run they've had lately. They've won 4 in a row. They beat Oklahoma, TCU, Baylor. They just beat Georgia yesterday. Where do you I know they got to be in right now, correct?
Yeah, I do have them in right now. It looks like they're my 6th to last team in right now, but beating Oklahoma and TCU is fantastic. I think they do lack a good road win right now. Their best 3 road wins right now are at Baylor, at Iowa State, and at Vanderbilt. And as we know, winning on the road in the Big 12 is just so challenging. I think Kansas might be the only team that has a road win in conference play in the Big 12 right now. So I'll give Kansas State a bit of a pass there. But if they are able to win a road game against a top 4, top 5 team in the Big 12, that puts them in an excellent position. But I think right now they have enough to get into the tournament.
Yeah, say what you want about Bruce Weber. I know he catches a bad rap. But he's got this team playing well, and you have to remember, they lost Camus Stokes, who's maybe their best player, and for them to be continuously winning games, I think is really impressive in a really, really good Big 12. Yeah. Absolutely. All right, so LSU is a team that I'm kind of interested in, and, at the end of the day, I don't think they're going to get in, but they've really had some nice wins. They beat Texas A&M twice. I know, they're struggling right now, but still a pretty talented team. They have some, they beat Arkansas on the road. They got some nice wins. What do you think about LSU's chances, and how close are they right now?
They're still on the outside looking in. I have them as my 7th team out right now. So they're definitely not out of it, but that 12-8 record does not look too great. I guess one of the benefits for LSU is that Vanderbilt did get into the tournament out of the SEC last year with a pretty average record. So LSU does have the opportunity to stack up some wins. They do go at Tennessee next week, so that's a big opportunity for them. They're also at Florida, at Alabama, at Georgia in the coming weeks. So they definitely have chances to beat tournament teams. So I guess the opportunity is there right now. Their best win is probably at Arkansas. So the home loss against Stephen F. Austin hurts them, and obviously losing on the road to Vanderbilt is also pretty tough. But I think LSU is on the outside looking in right now. They might be able to find a way if they can hit their stride in the coming weeks, but it'll probably be a miss for the Tigers, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I agree. But I'll say this, though, Eli. Just the fact that they're in the discussion, I think, is really impressive because they were picked last in the SEC. And I think Will Wade's done a pretty darn good job with this team.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. It goes to show you what Will Wade's been able to do in his first year there. I think once he gets some more players on that roster, they'll be in really good shape.
Yeah. And here's a team that actually LSU lost to is Houston. Now, Houston's a very intriguing team to me. They've been a big surprise. I think they've played really well this year. What do you think about Houston's chances, and where do you have them right now?
I do have them in the first four right now, so I do like their chances right now. The non-conference strength of schedule is a bit of a concern. That's 270. They also have a neutral loss to Drexel, which is 249th in in non-conference play. So that one's going to be pretty tough. They do have wins against Arkansas, Wichita State, and Providence. So those are wins that could have significant longevity as we go forward. I think Houston is going to need to win probably one more big game if they want to feel safe on Selection Sunday. And they do have their chances because they do play Cincinnati twice, they do play SMU twice, and they do have the American Conference tournament. So Houston will get their chances. They're in a top 15 RPI. The metrics seem to like them, be pretty favorable there. So Houston will have their chances. I think they'll probably end up getting in.
Okay. A few more here before we get out of here. Eli, TCU, I know we talked about them a little bit, but where do you have them right now in the bracket? And what do you think is a good range for them when it's all said and done, do you think?
I have TCU as a 5 right now. I'm taking a look at Bracket Matrix, and they have them as a 6. So I put a little bit more of a favor into that win over Nevada and West Virginia. But they need to start figuring things out if they want to hold on to a top 5, top 6 seed, because other teams, especially power conference teams, will be able to stack up those quality wins and will pass TCU like it's nothing. So I think they probably end up about 7 seed. I think that's probably fair for the Horned Frogs. They don't really have many bad losses besides that Vanderbilt loss. Most of the other ones are pretty excusable. Yeah. But just not a huge win yet. The West Virginia win's pretty nice, but if they can get another one like that, I think that could go a long way.
For sure. All right, 2 more things here. Now we're going to talk about my favorite team right now. That's St. Bonaventure.
Not
fans are big fans of College Shoot News. They love me. Where is this team right now? I watched them today. I'm not just saying this, but they don't pass the eye test. Where do you have the Bonnies?
I do have them as my 3rd team out, and I think they're probably pretty fortunate to be in that situation given how they've played recently. Yeah, go ahead.
I just don't know how they're there, okay? Because first of all, I think the Maryland and Syracuse wins aren't looking as good as they did earlier. So how are they still in that hunt with those 2 wins that look like kind of okay right now?
They do have the road wins at Buffalo and at Syracuse, which both fall under the Group 1 right now. And you can say what you want about both those teams, but at the very least, they'll be in the hunt when it's said and done. So those wins are decent right now, but if you're a St. Bonaventure fan leaning on wins over Syracuse or Vermont or Maryland to get in the tournament, that's just not going to get it done. And I guess the other thing to mention for Bonaventure is that they're in the A10, and Rhode Island is the only other team that really expects to get into the tournament. So there really just aren't many opportunities, like we say about the Mountain West or about the Big Ten, about the AAC. So Bonaventure, I think they're probably going to have to win the tournament if they want a shot. So they're in the mix right now, but once these other power conference teams are able to improve their RPI, improve the number of Quadrant 1 and Quadrant 2 wins, I think Bonaventure is going to be on the outside looking in as well.
Yeah, I just think that it's pretty simple with the A10, where if Rhode Island doesn't win the NCAA tournament, that's really the only way they're going to get 2 bids. I mean, I felt like that for a long time now.
It's similar for the Mountain West too, because I think a lot of people are saying the Mountain West is already a 1-bid league, and same thing with the A10. But if Nevada and Rhode Island both lose, they're probably in good shape to get into the tournament. So that'll probably send both leagues to 2 bids to the NCAAs, which would make pretty interesting for the NCAA tournament field. But if both Rhode Island and Nevada win their respective conference tournaments, I think you'll probably look at a 1-bid league for both.
Yeah. All right, so the final question I have for you tonight is not about a team, but it's a conference. It's Tim Brando's favorite conference, the Big Ten. Can they get 5 bids, Eli? Because I feel like, Purdue, Ohio State, Michigan State, and Michigan, I feel really good about those 4 teams. But then there's that next group, Maryland, Northwestern, maybe Nebraska. I don't really love their resume. Are they going to get 4 bids, or do you think they could sneak in a 5th?
I have a hard time believing that they're going to sneak in a fifth. I don't buy into Nebraska. Their RPI is terrible right now.
Yeah.
They do have a home win against Michigan. That's decent, but that's the only decent win that they possess. Penn State don't really think they have much of a shot.
No.
They do have that loss to Rider at home, which is enough to send you from the first four to the first four of the NIT. So that's another bad loss. I just think that the teams that are on the outside looking in the Big Ten, I just don't expect them to beat those four teams that you mentioned. And because of that, the number of quality wins that they can notch between now and Selection Sunday is very limited. So Minnesota is another team that we thought was going to be fantastic heading into the season. They're 3-7 right now in league play. That's a surprise. Northwestern's another team that was, they're probably top 15 along with Minnesota in the preseason. They've been very disappointed as well. So I think you're probably looking at 4 bids.
That's the problem with this league. There's so many teams that have disappointed. Northwestern, Maryland, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa is a team that I was raving about preseason, and they've just been terrible. They've been just really, really bad. So it's disappointing. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you before we get out of here, Michigan State is I saw them as like a 2 seed on ESPN, and I just don't think they're anywhere close to that resume wise. Where would you put Michigan State?
I do not buy them as a 2 seed at all. I think today's win at Maryland is definitely a good one. I think that falls in it does fall into the Group 1. So that does help them. That's only the second win that they have against the first RPI group, but the resume is just so limited. And Michigan State, it's hard to argue that they're not a top 5 team right now. I think everyone would agree with that, but they don't have even close to a top 5 resume with just 2 wins against the first group, 3 wins against the second group. They don't have a bad loss, but they're 23rd in RPI. And if they would have lost today to Maryland, they would have been outside the top 30 in RPI. So I guess one other thing to note about Michigan State is something that we've been saying about most of these other teams is that the Spartans have very limited opportunities as well. If they're not able to beat Purdue, they'll likely finish the regular season with just 2 quadrant 1 victories. And all the teams ahead of them will have more. I think Purdue right now has 6. Virginia and Villanova has anywhere between 7 or 8. So Michigan State just doesn't have the resume, but that could result in of just a team that no one would want to face as a 3 or 4 seed in the second round. So it does benefit Michigan State to a certain extent, but it could also create more difficult second and third round matchups.
Unfortunately, though, I think the committee will help them more than hurt them, if you know what I mean. I think
you do
them higher than they should be.
But I think to a certain extent that's good because everyone knows how good this Michigan State team is. They're fantastic. They're definitely a Final Four contender. So even if they don't have the resume right now, I think this is a perfect time where you take into account the eye test because Spartans are fantastic. They can beat anyone in the country. And even if they don't have the fantastic wins right now, we know just how good this team is.
Right. And hey, but we got to keep an eye on all that stuff that's going on at the school.
So that's right. Who knows what's going to transpire with all that? But so far, it seems like Michigan State's going to be able to tread water just fine.
All right, great. Well, good stuff tonight, Eli. I thank you for joining me. Obviously, again, guys, that was Eli Boettger from MWWire, and also check out his blog, heatcheckcbb.com. Eli, thanks for joining tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tony. Always love your stuff. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate it. So, guys, as you know, I'll be back next week, Sunday, with a new guest, another weekly recap. Also, on February 1st, in just a few days here this week, we're going to have a bracketology show on Periscope every week. Eli will be one of the guests in the near future, so definitely look out for that. Tony Patelis, College Hoop News. See you later.